but this will be constrained by existing electric power use, or no new dams, in other words. For heating, cooling, we'd basically use water, ice, and soil, and that's all you need. In fact, our university, actually last week I was so happy to see outside my office window the bulldozers bulldozing a natural gas plant that was powering the university, and they shut it off in April. It provided 80% of the heating and electricity for the campus, and they just realized they don't need it. So because they replaced it with heat exchanging, 2 boilers and a chiller, and solar, and that's providing now the 80% heating and electricity. And so it just reduced the carbon footprint of the university by 80%. And but the university has actually had an ice cube under a building since 1998. So to reduce electricity use in the afternoons, and this is simply because when you have, at night, you can form ice from excess electricity at low price, and then use it in the afternoon, melt the ice in the afternoon for cooling the campus. So there's a lot of things with heat exchanging going on that are really innovative. So for soil heating, in fact, there's a community in Drake Landing, Canada, which is in Alberta, Okotoks, which is about an hour south of Calgary. For 8 years, there are 52 homes that have solar collectors on their roof on the garages, and there's a glycol solution that in the summer, the solution gets heated by the sun, it gets transferred to water, water then gets piped underground into these boreholes under a park, and heats rocks. And water heats rocks up to like 80 degrees Celsius. It's insulated, and then the whole system is run in reverse in the wintertime when it snows on the ground, provides 100% of all the heat of this community. And batteries cost about $350 per kilowatt hour of storage. Seasonal heat storage, it costs $1 a kilowatt hour. It's just rocks. And you can't even tell it's there because it's covered by a park. I mean, I was there, I was standing on it, I had no idea where the storage was, and it turned out I was standing right on it. And it's just a grassy park in a neighborhood. So this is something that can be done on a large scale. It's seasonal heat storage. And then also hydrogen and demand response management are other ways. Hydrogen is a form of storage. Basically, when you have excess wind or solar, you can produce hydrogen and then use it in vehicles when you need it. And demand response is when you try to control the time of use of electricity by giving incentives. So this is pretty common. Why not natural gas? Well, you all know why not natural gas. It's 50 to 70 times more CO2 per kilowatt hour than wind in terms of the air pollution and in terms of carbon dioxide, but also air pollution is about 50 to 70 times more per kilowatt hour. The methane from natural gas leakage is a problem. I mentioned the 5,000 premature deaths per year, and hydrofracking is causing excess methane leaks. But I want to point out also just the land use alone. In the Great Plains of the US and Canada, there are over 2 million gas wells, either unused or capped, or used or capped. And that's 2 million, and they take up, including the well pads, the roads, and the storage facilities, an area that's greater than the size of New Jersey. And this is, to power the whole US, for all purposes, well, if we do half the U.S., 50% with wind, we would only need about almost 500,000 wind turbines, and these don't leak. And they don't take up nearly as much land area. They would take 4 square kilometers actually on the ground of land for the footprint of the turbines, but they'll need about 1.6% of the land for spacing between them that can be used for multiple purposes, but they don't cause nearly the devastation that all this natural gas mining. This is just gas mining in the Great Plains, not even talking about the rest of the country and Canada, and not even talking about oil or coal. So it's a humongous problem. It's just destroying the countryside of the United States of America. And so if we look at why not like ethanol for vehicles? This is the area required to power the entire U.S. vehicle fleet on cellulosic ethanol, which doesn't even exist. It's second generation ethanol. And this is the area required for corn ethanol. It's a little more certain in terms of the area. But it's on the order of the average of this is 14% of the entire U.S., including Alaska. And for nuclear, it's not as much as the size of Rhode Island, so you can sacrifice Rhode Island for nuclear power. But wind powering battery electric vehicles, the area Well, the black dot is the spacing between wind turbines that can be used for rangeland, farmland, or open space. The red dot in the center is less than 3 square kilometers to power the whole U.S. vehicle fleet, but a lot of that could go offshore. Solar takes up about 1/3 of the land area for spacing compared with wind to power the U.S. vehicle fleet, and geothermal is even less, but they both have more footprint on the ground than wind. But all geothermal, solar, PV, and wind, they're not going to take up huge areas. But you're doing the exact same thing with all this corn ethanol as you are with either wind, solar, or geothermal powering battery electric vehicles. So it's just from a land use point of view, this is never going to happen. Okay, so let's look at can you power the whole world and California, well, the U.S. and here's China on here with wind, water, and solar. Right now, the world power demand is about 13 trillion watts or terawatts for all purposes. It goes to 22 terawatts in 2050. But if we convert everything to wind, water, solar, we reduce power demand by 38% worldwide to about 13.4 terawatts. That's because electricity is so much more efficient than burning. For example, an electric car, the plug-to-wheel efficiency is between 80 to 86%. 80 to 86% of the electricity going into the car goes to move the car, and the rest is waste heat. For a gasoline car, only 17 to 20% of the energy in gasoline goes to move the car, and the rest is heat that's wasted. So you reduce your power demand by electrifying vehicles by a factor of 4 to 5. And that results in the cost of driving an electric car is 1/4 to 1/5 that of a gasoline car. So it's about 80 cents a gallon equivalent. So you drive an electric car for 15 years, 15,000 miles per year, you'd save about $20,000 in fuel costs. And so there's an efficiency gain in terms of reduced energy, and there's a cost gain in terms of lower fuel costs. Now, in the U.S., you'd reduce about 39% of your power demand. Well, by the way, about 6 percentage points of this, in each case, is 6 to 7% is end-use energy efficiency improvements beyond the business-as-usual energy improvements that are expected by 2050. So we assume very modest and additional end-use energy efficiency improvements. If we get more energy efficiency improvements, that would even make it easier to solve this problem. But by electrifying, you're reducing power demand significantly. And this means that even if the price of electricity is the same in 2050, well, for wind, water, solar as conventional fuels, your total energy bill is going to be 35 to 40% less, because the price per kilowatt hour, let's say, is the same. You just need 35 to 40% fewer kilowatt hours. And so you're going to save money for sure. And we have found that the direct cost of energy with a wind, water, solar system accounting for reliability is similar to that of a conventional fuel system. So people will save money because they're using less energy. But not only that, they'll also save all the health and climate costs, which translates into more than the direct cost of electricity. So for example, the direct cost of electricity on average today is about 13 cents per kilowatt hour. That's what people pay on average in the US. But the health and climate costs today are around the same, around 13 cents, and they'll go up to about 17 cents a kilowatt hour in 2050. So by eliminating fossil fuels, you're cutting your costs more than half in terms of the social costs from a societal point of view. And your direct costs are less because you're using less energy. So there's really little downside it'll turn out. Now, this is the number of devices we need for powering the United States. We did 50 state plans. And this is the number of devices you need. So it's about 50% wind in the U.S., around 35% solar. Well, there's 31% solar PV, 7.3% solar CSP, and then 7.5 to 8% rooftop solar, 3% hydroelectric, 1.25% geothermal, and a tiny amount of tidal wave. But this is a map showing the land area needed to power the entire U.S. for all purposes in 2050 with wind, water, and solar, accounting for growth and the efficiencies of converting to electricity. And most of this land is spacing area for wind, 1.6% of the U.S. land for spacing. And so that space can be used for multiple purposes. Rooftop PV is not going to take up new land. PV plus CSP, it's about 38% of the total power. It's going to take up 0.3% of U.S. land. Now, we did plans for 139 countries. Well, we're almost finished with them, and we're going to release them within 2 or 3 weeks before this Paris conference. This kind of gives you a land area layout of power 139 countries of the world, which represent close to 95% of all the emissions. It's not going to take up a huge land area to do this. We don't have time to show that. I just wanted, well, I probably have to skip this. Which countries do you think is actually furthest to get to 100% for all purposes? You would never believe it, but it's Paraguay. Paraguay is 73% there. Well, it's kind of cheating because they have all hydro. And they not only produce right now 100% of all their electricity from hydro, but they export like 100% of another 100% to 2 different countries, Argentina and Brazil. So they have so much hydro available that it's pretty easy. But then Norway, Tajikistan, Iceland, Kyrgyzstan, Albania, Sweden, and Georgia, they're the top 8 in terms of closest to being to 100% renewable energy. Most of it's from hydro. The United States is like 69, and China is like 47 on this list. But I want to skip these because I don't have time. I got a 2-minute warning 2 minutes ago. So this is hydroelectric by country as of 2014. Onshore wind by country. These are just which countries have the most installed power. There's China, the U.S. for onshore wind, the U.S. and China for geothermal, Germany, China for PV, rooftop PV, and utility scale PV. This is concentrated solar power, Spain and the U.S. Tidal power, South Korea and France are the most installations. Solar worldwide, there's 25 times more solar worldwide than you need to power the world for all purposes. There's plenty of it over land. For wind, there's 5 to 6 times more wind over land than you need to power the world for all purposes. I talked about reliability. We did a study looking at can we actually, for our 50 states, well, we looked at the 48 contiguous states for this reliability study. We simulated whether it was possible for the grid to stay reliable across the whole 48 states if we have intermittent wind and solar evaluated every 30 seconds with a climate model. And we found, yes, we could do this every 30 seconds for 6 years with 0 loss of load. And this shows results on the monthly average comparing the energy supply and the energy demand. And it matched perfectly on the monthly average, it matched perfectly on the hourly average. This is hourly for 4 days and 2 different sets of 4 days. And also it was perfect for every 30 seconds over the 6-year period. So, and this was at a cost of 11 cents per kilowatt hour unsubsidized cost of levelized cost of energy. Now, these are the costs of wind. Right now, wind is the cheapest form of electricity right now in the U.S. by far, but 3.7 cents per kilowatt hour unsubsidized, mostly due to Great Plains wind. That compares to gas combined cycle, 6.1 cents to 8 cents a kilowatt hour. Utility scale solar is close to natural gas at 7 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour. But some places it's actually from 5 to 6. Anyway, the point is that wind and solar are very cost competitive on the large scale right now with gas. Wind is cheaper. And so in terms of job creation, the plans, 50 state plans, would produce a net 2 million more jobs than we'd lose. And this is another benefit of the conversion. And finally, the timeline to transition, by 2030, we want 80% conversion. In 2050, 100%. The top line is if we don't do anything, that's the energy demand in the future in 2050. The first gray line is if we electrify everything, that's the reduction of power demand. The second gray line is additional end-use energy efficiency improvements. And then we reach the 100% line, and we want to reach that 100% with wind, water, and solar. So this shows from our 50 state plans how much wind versus solar and geothermal, et cetera. Now, I should point out, so 80% by 2030 is a goal, and 100% by 2050. We did present these plans to the governor's staff in both New York and California, and lo and behold, they actually, both the cases, they adopted 62% of the 2030 goals. So we met with Governor Brown's office last October, just before the election, and then in January he proposed 50% by 2030. And so I'd like to think that it was because of this, but I'm not sure. But he didn't. They were very mum about giving credit to it. But he did adopt 50%. It was gutted by the oil. The transportation sector was gutted by the oil companies. But there is an end around because the California Resources Board, they actually have control of the transportation sector, And their strategy, actually, their published strategy, was published last week, was to reduce petroleum use by 50% in the state by 2050, which was part of that legislation, and to reduce air pollution emissions by 80%, and to reduce diesel PM emissions from trucks by around, I think it was 45 to 50% as well.
Did you say that's by 2050 or
2030, sorry, okay. 2030, yeah. There, it's online. You can find the California Resources Board strategy. So they're really addressing this goal of 50% by 2030, despite the fact that there's not a law, because they can actually ratchet down emissions to force electric vehicles. So there's a strategy to do this. So just to conclude, for the U.S. to go to 100% renewable energy, we would reduce power demand, including some energy efficiency improvements, by 39%. Eliminate 62,000 or so air pollution deaths per year, eliminate up to $3.3 trillion to world climate costs from U.S. emissions alone by 2050, create 2 million more jobs than we lose, and we'd require only 0.4% of U.S. land for footprint and 1.6% for spacing. And the cost of an integrated storage plus wind, water, solar system plus demand response is on the order of 11 to 12 cents per kilowatt hour, the levelized cost of energy, which is similar to the current cost of energy from fossil fuels. But we would save about 17 cents a kilowatt hour in health and climate costs by 2050. But there are barriers, including upfront costs, transmission needs, and there's a lot of lobbying and politics. Materials are not limits. So we do think that this is technically and economically feasible to do such a transformation. The main barriers are social and political. And to that end, this is the final slide. If you're more interested in the actual studies, they're all located at that website. Or you can go to thesolutionsproject.org, and there's a map that actually you can click on a state. And on that state will pop up an energy plan that summarizes the 50 state plans. Right below the map is the link to the first website, so you don't have to write all that down. So you can get it from there. You can also check out the Solutions Project. There's a motivational video here as well. But anyway, the Solutions Project is a nonprofit to try to take these energy plans and educate the public and businesses and policymakers about them to try to effect a faster transition. So with that, I will stop and allow this to continue. Thanks.
Thank you, Kassie and Mark, for those great presentations there. So I have a few questions. So we're going to go over some of my questions, and then we'll have an opportunity for you all, the audience members, to ask your own questions of the speakers. So Kassie, why, on fracking, why a ban? Why not more regulation? We're often told that regulation is the big first step, and it's more realistic to do regulation. So why won't that work?
That's a great question, and we have the health component and we have the climate component. And that presentation, I think, just covered the climate component of that question. But the health component fracking, it's like smoking. So some things are just inherently unsafe, and regulation is an essential part of society, but some things you really can't regulate them, you just need to not do them, and fracking is in that category. And then there's thank you. And then there's a third part of that question, which is that we are told a lot of things about regulations, and one of the most shocking things to me about working on this issue for the last few years is what we've learned about the regulatory system in California, which we've been told it's strong, we've been told it's going to protect people, and what we've learned is that virtually everything we've been told about the regulation of the oil industry in California by California oil regulators whose job is to protect Californians has been a lie. We have all of these basic rules that are supposed to protect the air we breathe and the water we drink and our health from oil, and state regulators have admitted that they have ignored or broken virtually all of these rules. And that's what's going on right now in California. Right now, oil companies are dumping their toxic waste fluid directly into protected drinking water aquifers that are supposed to be protected for drinking and irrigation now and in the future. In Los Angeles, in Los Angeles, just a couple of weeks ago, a long-awaited report was released by state regulators, and there's a basic review you do before you allow underground injection to go on to make sure that you're protecting the aquifers, and they admitted that for 77% of drilling projects in Los Angeles, the area of review analysis, this basic analysis, had never been done. I mean, absolutely shocking. So lots of reasons why we need a ban on fracking, and we've got to get off fossil fuels completely.
Great, thank you. And so Kassie, you talked about, well, you both talked about the transition to 100% clean renewable energy. My focus in my work is around environmental justice communities. So what do you think that transition looks like on the ground in environmental justice communities? How are the most impacted low-income communities and communities of color that have the most at stake in this transition? What does that look like for them?
So I think I want to start answering that question with a story, because I saw somebody come in just now. And I want to tell you a little bit about Rodrigo Romo. He's a dad in the Central Valley. And Mr. Romo's two daughters go to Sequoia Elementary School in Shafter. And that elementary school is surrounded by fracked wells. And when you stand on the playing field there, there's an oil and gas drill rig right behind the soccer goal. It's right outside the fence. And Mr. Romo's daughters often have to stay inside because of the noxious fumes that come from all of this stuff, and they're often really, really sick. And this is happening in environmental justice communities overwhelmingly. Over 60,000 students go to school within a mile of a fracked well, and over 60% of them are Latino. And Mr. Romo, recently represented by a fabulous organization called the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment, sued the state for the racially discriminatory practices that have led to this and have led to Mr. Romo's daughter's illness. And so what does the injustice look like, and what does the action look like? I started with this story because I saw Madeline Stanow come in from Center on Race, Poverty, and Environment, and she is a young rising star lawyer who's litigating this case, and she is working in Kern County, where more than 3/4 of the oil development in California takes place in these vulnerable communities. And all of this story that I was just able to tell to you is the result of Madeline and her colleagues' work to get this out there, and the hard work of those community members. So I wanted to see if Madeline wanted to come up, make any more comments about the case, maybe about the Kern County ordinance, and what people can do. Yay. Yeah, I think that one.
Actually, I got one.
Oh, you got, okay, great, thank you.
Wow, that was very generous. Thanks, Kassie. And thank you all. So we had a hearing in that case on Monday. The state tried to throw us out. Their main arguments were that the kids were already sick in the Central Valley, so there was no new additional burden placed on them that could be measurable in a way that was legally recognizable. And then the other thing was, well, despite a statute saying they had to do better, they didn't really have to do better. So we argued the heck out of that on Monday, and we'll keep you all posted. So that's just a little bit about Rodrigo's case as it moves through. But we also are inviting folks, based on Rodrigo is a leader on a committee of residents that we have been working with at CRPE for about 2.5 years on well stimulation and fracking issues. and they have been working, they've been suing folks, they've been telling their own stories and videos and other projects. You might have seen pictures of Sequoia Elementary School. That's all their work that is a privilege to uplift. And they are fighting back against a giant, 1,200-page technical behemoth, which is known as a combined oil and gas ordinance at the county level. So Kassie mentioned, 75% of oil in California comes out of the ground there. So if you're concerned about climate, if you're concerned about health, we need to deal with this ordinance. This ordinance tries to suspend mainstream environmental review of each and every well in Kern County for the next 25 years. So it's a way to fast track the industry to get every last drop. Well, there is a drop through conventional or unconventional methods with as little protection as possible. And Rodrigo and others have testified at the hearings. The center and other folks have put together technical comments. And on November 9th, it's all going down with a decision. And at the last meeting, our little crew of folks standing up to the industry were outnumbered 6 to 350 people. And while many of those people were paid directly by the oil industry, our residents asked us to put out the call to folks around the state to come and stand behind them. So that is what we are doing. If you want to stand behind their leadership, their resistance, those most impacted, this is a direct request from some of them to show up in Kern County in the belly of the oil beast and watch them give public testimony, make them feel safe, make them feel supported, let them know that while they are facing extraction firsthand, there are many people across the state who support them, and let's make those decision makers shake in their boots because they are not expecting you all to be there. So thank you.
Awesome. Woo. Thank you. Yeah, you're going to circulate that? Wonderful.
So there's more information if you want to come on November 9th. I didn't give you any of the exact details, but it's on here.
There's a bus sign up outside on the Food and Water Watch table.
We have clipboards with the sign-up sheet for the buses. And there's a number of clipboards. They're going to be passed around, so please take those. They'll also be outside. And please do visit the tables of all of our wonderful co-sponsoring organizations that have information outside. As good activists, we want to give you concrete things that you can do, and this is so important and so timely. We did want to highlight this November 9th mobilization in Kern County, so if you clipboards don't come around and you want them, just catch any one of us after the program and we'll get you that info.
Awesome. Okay. And I just have a couple more questions, and then I think I'm going to open it up to the audience. So this question is for the both of you. What difference will it make if California stops producing oil, given that oil production, the oil market is such an international thing? So I'm going to, and this is for the both of you. So Mark, you want to go first?
Well, my focus has been looking at, like taking transition to electric vehicles. Certainly, like the drop of gas prices makes it more difficult to transition because people hang on to their cars or buy the next SUV as opposed to buy an electric vehicle. So I guess the biggest impact of whether California digs for oil or not will be on oil prices. So if oil prices go up, then that's good because then more people will then transition to electric vehicles. But in terms of the benefits to the environment, like it has been talked about already, there's going to be a significant benefit to the health of children and adults and communities because land can be used for better purposes. So it's definitely it's beneficial to stop drilling from multiple points of view: health, environmental, and also to try to keep the cost of oil up rather than down.
Great. Kassie?
California and Norway are two good examples of states and countries that are in a position to lead on this. We just have to leave it in the ground. We have to leave it in the ground everywhere, but we have to start leaving it in the ground here first. You can't be a climate leader if you are producing shale oil. And California also happens to have some of the most carbon-intensive oil in the world. Some of our heavy oil in the Central Valley is more carbon-intensive than the tar sands of Alberta. So it's just critically important.
Wonderful. Okay, great. And so, Mark, you can you tell us a little bit more about the public health benefits and the job creation figures in your presentation? I'm particularly interested in the public health and the jobs figures, especially for if there's been anything done on environmental justice or low-income communities, the most impacted.
Yeah, well, in terms of health in California, I mean, the biggest health problems in California are in the Central Valley in the wintertime. There's high concentrations of particulate matter, both due to the influx of people in terms of there's a lot more traffic, but also agricultural machines. And the meteorology of the valley is such that in the winter in particular, air gets trapped near the ground, so the pollution just builds up and people are exposed to higher pollution. In Los Angeles, the problem is mostly in the summer because of ozone formation, but also particles, what are called secondary particles, particles that aren't emitted but form chemically in the atmosphere. Los Angeles has, in the summer and in the autumn, has some of the worst air pollution, well, still has the worst air pollution in the country by far overall. So these plans would eliminate, in both cases, major sources of air pollutants, and there would be a significant benefit for all Californians. So it'll be across the board. I mean, if we eliminated all emissions of all kinds, then there would, I mean, regardless of your community, it'll benefit. Like in Los Angeles, I mean, most emissions are on the west side of Los Angeles, and they get transferred to the east side of Los Angeles. So either the people worst affected by air pollution are those living first near freeways, right, in the proximity of a freeway. But in Los Angeles, it's not actually where the emissions occur. The worst damage occurs. Actually, the worst damage occurs in Riverside, San Bernardino, and even in the San Bernardino Mountains, where you have the highest pollution level. So there's, because of the transport and the chemical cooking of pollution as it moves along, it's not actually the people you think are getting affected the most that are getting affected the most. It's really people downwind, except for those who live right near freeways. So there's going to be this definite benefit because we eliminate pretty much all freeway pollution and general pollution that would transfer in Los Angeles to the east side. We'd eliminate tractor pollution and vehicle pollution in the Central Valley. Wouldn't necessarily eliminate dust, but dusts are more larger particles that don't penetrate deeper into the lungs, so it's not, those are not the major sources of the air pollution mortality in the Central Valley. In terms of jobs, as I mentioned, in the U.S., we'd create about 4 million construction jobs and about 2 million permanent operation jobs over the 50 states, and we'd lose about 4 million jobs. So there's a net creation of around 2 million jobs over 35 years between 2015 and, sorry, I think it was 35 years, 2015 to 2050. So these would be, so there's really, I don't know, if you look at all the benefits of such a plan and the fact that you reduce, you distribute energy, so you have wind and solar that are distributed energy sources where there's less risk of like a terrorist attack on a centralized facility. There's less risk of a power disruption because you have so many different generators. And you produce all your energy in-state, or most of it in-state, as opposed to having to ship it from overseas. So you can reduce international conflict, you can eliminate global warming, eliminate air pollution, stabilize energy prices, create jobs. There's very little downside to such a transition.
That's great. Thank you. And Mark, I want to talk about cost. We often hear, in my work especially, when we do advocacy in Sacramento, that going more renewable energy will just cost too much. So can you talk a little bit more about the cost of going more renewable and versus the payback and the benefits?
Yeah, I mean, historically, that's been, the industries have said that, well, renewables either cost too much or they're unreliable. These are the two main things. Or that wind turbines kill birds, that's the other thing. But all these are real myths. I mean, even the bird thing is a myth in the sense that you're not just adding a wind turbine to the environment. You're replacing a gas or coal, which kills 10 times more birds per kilowatt hour generated than does wind. And the number of wind the number of bird deaths that wind turbines cause in the U.S., according to the Fish and Wildlife Service, is around 500,000 per year. But the Bird Conservancy and Fish and Wildlife Service estimate that cats kill 1 to 3 billion birds per year in the U.S. And buildings are about 1 billion birds per year, so it's a red herring. But I went back to the question in terms of costs. So wind is right now the cheapest form of electricity in the U.S. by a factor of 2. And solar is about the same as natural gas. But rooftop solar on houses, residential, is still 2 to 3 times more than utility scale solar. And offshore wind is about 2 to 3 times more than onshore wind, which is why you haven't seen a big penetration. But we looked at the mix that we proposed, and we looked at the levelized cost of energy in all those cases in detail, and we accounted for the storage that you would need to make the grid stable and the demand response, and we find that it was 11 to 12 cents a kilowatt hour, which is similar to the cost of energy today, and that's for a reliable grid. But you eliminate these air pollution and climate costs, and you have all these other side benefits.
Great, okay. So my final question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So your presentation talked a lot about big solar in the work, large-scale solar. In the work that we do, we often look to a lot more local distributed generation as being the primary solution, especially for communities that are most impacted in California. Why don't you project more distributed generation? And has your opinion about that changed recently at all?
Well, no, we project about that. We try to put the maximum amount of solar on rooftops that you can possibly do. So there are numbers for 7.5% to 8% PV on rooftops is limited by the rooftop areas in the United States. So that's about 70% of south-facing roofs that are non-shaded in the United States. And in 2050, accounting for growth. So the point is, it's not, electricity today is only 20% of total energy. So when you might see studies that say, we can power 30 or 40% of the US with rooftop solar, well, that's true in terms of the electric power sector, but then you have to divide that by a factor of 5 to get the total energy, because we're trying to do total energy. So from total energy point of view, we can do